Good morning. Let's begin from the beginning. Let's start from the beginning. Each one of us, independently of who we are, where we live, what our where we were raised, our culture, our religious context, our the education that we received, our social cultural context, where we live in the world, and and even going beyond whether we're a human being or not, what form of animal we are. I mean, there's something that is common to all of us, and what is the most common among all of us is this energy, this strength that makes us do everything that we do. If we look at the history of humanity, all the things we've been able to create, the good, bad, and ugly, in every case, what we do, there's a force behind what we do that pushes us to do what we do. In Tibetan, we call it sepa. You can in the translation we use we it's translated as craving, like a deep non-conceptual desire. It's something that we have deep inside of us, this attraction to happiness and aversion to suffering. In just a few words, there's there, there, there's no one wants to suffer, and there no one that no one wants to suffer, and no one doesn't want to be happy. I mean, this is an important starting point. All of us, independently of who we are, where we are, what we do, we want to be happy and we don't want to suffer. We can see this in every situation, in every context. Beyond this, right after this craving, this strong desire, this energy that pushes us towards well-being, and as a consequence, it wants to keep us away from suffering. So in reality, they're two aspects of the same thing. Wanting to be well and not wanting to suffer, they're like two sides of the same coin. They're two different things, but one complements the other. In the end, they are of the same nature. We say noa chikla de patata in Tibetan. It means that they have the same they have the same nature but two different appearances. So if there's one, then there's the other. If one is missing, the other one's not there either. And on the basis of this strong desire, and that I imagine all of us are able to recognize, there's a part that comes right after, which is instead what is translated, because the translations often the you know we unfortunately the meaning doesn't always stay with these translations. When I've tried to translate someone, I've always tried to be as faithful as possible, but only once I wasn't faithful, let's say, because this person was saying things that really it just didn't match the situation, and I knew the person, and I let's say I modified the translation a little bit. That's the only time I ever did something like that. But generally speaking, when we translate, the terms often are weak, because language is putting into sounds the concepts that exist, and according to the the social, cultural, religious context, the history of every people's, every language, certain concepts exist in one context and they don't exist in another. When we translate, we use words that come from our context. In this case, English or Italian for Lama. So, you know, terms, though, that come from a totally different social um, context. So I try to explain these words, these terms. So once we have this craving that takes us, that drives us towards well-being, that manifests itself as attraction to happiness and aversion to suffering. Right away after that, in Tibetan, it's called lempa, translated as attachment. But again, here it's a translation that isn't great. It's where we project our happiness onto something, and we project onto something else the causes of our suffering. So I want to be happy. What makes me happy? Where? Because at the basis there's this strong attraction. But this attraction then it has a direction. And the same thing, I don't want to suffer. What is it that makes me suffer? And it's here where we can start dividing up beings. Let's talk about human beings, the divisions, you know, different points of view, or even if we look at maybe some would say they don't agree, but in the end, too, I think even if we look at politics, at the end of the day, even in politics, what do we want? We talk about the different political parties, given that we're close to an election here. I certainly don't want to talk about politics here, but to say that everyone wants the well-being of the country, I don't know, but what people want is happiness. And here I open and close parentheses quickly. Once in the monastery, my master, when he finished his philosophical studies, the abbot asked him to become one of the philosophy teachers. And he said no. He said, I can't teach what I have not understood. And he became a teacher to teach the children how to learn to read and write, and then he became an administrator of the monastery. I mean, imagine there were like 4,000 disciples. He worked tremendously. He followed also the work of the monastery. I mean, he would wake up, and meditate for 3 hours, have breakfast, and then work all day and study and come back and do his practices longer. So he had a lot of experience. We're talking about someone, one day talking about someone who needed to serve the public, to be a public figure. So, whether it's a Dharma center, a monastery, to govern a country, he said the first characteristics that a person needs to have to govern well is not about knowledge and not even technical abilities or even ideas that one has, but that this person knows how to give priority to the common good above his own. This would be the starting point. But at the end of the day, we all want the same thing, but we all just have different ideas on how to get there. We all want to be happy, and we don't want to suffer. Those dedicate themselves to sports, to politics, or to go, living in the mountains. At the end of the day, we want to be happy. I'll just go right to the point here without going on too long about this. In this research for happiness, which is basically the history of our humanity on many, many aspects, it's divided mostly into two possible paths. The two crossroads, originally called the difference between, in India, when I say originally, I mean in India, is the division between what is worldly and what is spiritual. In our life, we can have a little bit of both. We mix things up. It's not it doesn't have to be just on one side or the other. But normally, when we suffer, what do we do? Do we just stay there in our suffering state? Or do we ask ourselves immediately why? Do we try, do we look for something, someone, to be the one to blame? Are we ready to point the finger at the reason? I mean, even when we're well, even when we're happy and joyous, we try to understand why. I saw this in myself once. It was a very strange situation because I was I w- I w- I was in Calcutta. It was amazingly hot, and I was I needed to go from the I needed to go to the domestic um, part of the airport and go to the international. And they were restructuring. It was hard to understand. I was by myself. I was maybe 12 years old, and I had a cart just full of luggage, with one wheel that wasn't working well, and there were people that were yelling because they were about to lose their flight. It was just amazingly chaotic, let's say, not at all relaxing. But I it's clear this image in the parking lot with the cart that wasn't going well. I was just struck by joy. I had this feeling of happiness, of joy that came from deep inside. And what was interesting is I wasn't able to understand why I was feeling happy. I couldn't find a reason. I mean, around me in my immediate circumstance, I couldn't say, "Oh, I'm happy for this." And it made me reflect. I said, "You see, we generate this feeling, be it happiness or suffering, and when we have this feeling, normally what do? We try to understand what's happening inside, observing the surrounding world, the world around us. There's a study that was done. I read it once in an article. A lady in England who did a scientific study on human behavior, and her conclusions was, in reality, it's very difficult for us to understand what's happening. And normally, we judge our feelings based on the context in which we find ourselves. And she was giving her own example where one day she finished, she was working late in the laboratory, and one of her co-workers, it was like 10 o'clock at night. He said, "Okay, let's leave the lab. Let's go to the pub and have a drink." And she said, "Okay, let's go." And she went, and then after the second beer, she started to feel like like a strange movement, like a heat in her body, in her belly. And she started asking herself, maybe I like this guy. I mean, I feel something inside. Okay, let's have one more beer. And she says, well, let's see what happens. At the end, she went home, already with like another date planned to go out together. And she was asking herself, well, maybe I like him. And then she got home and she realized that she had a fever and she was sick. In reality, it was a physical process, but given the context in which she found herself, she tried to understand what was happening inside by observing the external situation in which she was. And this is what we do all the time. What's the danger of this behavior that we have? That if I go to, how do I say, if I have a feeling and I judge what's happening inside of me according to what's happening around me, and I recognize I feel bad because this happened. So towards that object, what feeling do I develop? Attraction, aversion, or indifference? Aversion. So I'll try to stay far from that object because I don't want to feel that feeling of suffering. And instead, if I feel good when I'm near something else, then I'll want always to be close to that object. Obviously, there's a relationship between our surrounding environment and our feelings. There's no doubt about this, but it's not all there. So this first crossroads that we were talking about is we one part on one side we project our happiness and our suffering mostly on the world around us, not exclusively, but mostly, where we say, I'm happy because this is like this and that is like that. I will be happy when this will be like this and when that will be like that. I suffer because of this situation, because this person acts like this. I will I will be happy when this is no longer like this. I don't know what it's like for you, but I imagine that that most of us, to not say everyone, if we stop for a moment and if we observed ourselves without elaborating too much, some part, do we have an idealized image of our life? If it were like this or that, then we would be happy, we'd be fine. If this was no longer like that, or if that wasn't like this, if that was like this, and this was like that, then we'd be fine. I mean, we have this, don't we? And somehow we spend our lives trying to reach that. So where we project the causes of our suffering, we try to avoid those things, and where we try to project the causes of our happiness, we try to get close. And this is one of the paths that I call the materialistic utopia, is where we believe that it's possible to be happy and not suffer, to reach this objective that we all want through a a material through material development. And here I'm including also people. I want this person to be like that. I want that person to be like that. I want to meet my Prince Charming or my Sleeping Beauty. And so we have this projection. In other words, it's the view where if I suffer, it's because the world is not the way it should be. So it's a reality where we have a strong attraction of victimizing ourselves. Excuse me if I say it so clearly, but when we're not well and we point the finger at someone, we're the victim, aren't we? Because if I'm suffering, it's not my fault. And we add something else too here. Once I was I went to go see a friend in Brazil. I had gone to see him because he had just had a very bad accident. He works in the TV, and he had gone to do a program on the other part of Brazil, and he was with his whole family in a small airplane, but then the airplane crashed. They had an amazing good luck because they were flying above the forest, and at a certain point, when the engine started to fail and they needed to have an emergency landing, but there was no time to plan. It had to go down immediately. It was the only place in kilometers and kilometers of forest. In this place, there was an open pasture. If it had happened a few minutes before, a few minutes after, there wouldn't have been any place to land. And when they landed, it wasn't a it wasn't a landing, um, an airport. Um, an airport, and there was a kind of bump, and so the airplane hit this little hill, and then it went over many, many, many cows, and then fell over these cows. Okay, someone broke a rib here or there, but nothing too serious. And when I went to go to see him, he was still. It was a few days after, but he was still a little bit under shock, and he asked me, Lama, so many people have come to me to tell me that God didn't want me to die. But from your point of view, or your Buddhist point of view, where you don't talk about God, why did things go the way they went? Why did they go the way they did? And it made me reflect, and and it I mean, why did things go in that way? For the same reason why all of us, we got up this morning, we had breakfast, we took the car, and we are here now. I mean, it's a very, very complex, infinite relationship of cause and effect. But when it all goes the way we think it should go, but when it doesn't correspond to our expectations, then it went badly or it's a miracle. So a miracle would be a positive interdependence that we're not able to understand. But what I mean to say with all this is that there's never one reason. When something happens, it's never it, in that way because one thing happened. We can't find the reason, the guilty one. It's an enormous co complex complexity of interactions that bring a result. Just think. Uh, I mean, think about everything that was necessary for each one of us to be here now together. I'm just an infinite number of things. Not going to start now talking about the story of today. We'll never finish. So even if many, many antidotes come, um, I'm not going to open this door to say like, oh, if this hadn't happened, then we wouldn't be here, etc. But the point is that when things happen, our tendency is to find the reason or the guilty one or the solution. When in reality, there is not one solution. There is not, one guilty one or one reason. There's a union. There's a union of many, many, many causes. So in this first view that we called materialistic utopia, it's here we believe in this mechanism. I will be happy when the world is when the world is the way I think it should be. And then we're also victims when it doesn't go the way we think it should go. And here also in this view, we're looking for the solution. I mean, this is how, without getting into too many details, this is basically where we are, isn't it? The other path is where we say, no, the world in which I live is complex. But what happens is I perceive it and I live it through myself. What happens is that really no one of us is able to live or perceive any situation independently of the filter of self. no matter what it is, we perceive everything through ourselves. Even even now that I'm speaking to you, there's something. It's like magic. It's a real miracle what's happening because what's happening. I try to elaborate my feelings, my concepts, my ideas. I transform them into sound. This sound comes to your hearing, and what do you do with those sounds? You attribute meaning. It's that, so that sometimes I, sometimes when I ask, have you understood? Have you understood? And you say, yes, I think to myself, what have you understood? Because in reality, it's very difficult. It's very difficult for one to say something and the other to understand what the person wanted to say. You know, some people come to me and they say, "Oh, no one understands me." I say, "Don't worry, no one will ever understand you," because communication is fragile in itself. Because when I see something, it's what I see. It's not what is there. When I hear something, it's what I'm hearing. It's not what the other person said. I don't know if this is clear or not. So what happens is we have many, many filters through which we perceive our reality every moment of, uh, everything we see, every perception that we have, that we hear or smell or touch. I mean, this all comes through these different filters that we have. I mean, some we can't do much about. Instead, others we have a lot of control over. Let's see very quickly. I don't want to go on too long, but to get to our point, why should we meditate? We have five main filters and we can add a sixth. The first filter, without going into too many details, is actually our genetics. We are strongly influenced on many levels on the experiences lived by our parents, grandparents, great grandparents, our ancestors. It seems strange, but I this I understood clearly when I took a puppy, because I took this dog and then I saw that this dog knows how to do so many things in spite of not having been taught. And the trainer was telling me, no, this is called the ancestral memory, because in nature, you know, the dog you know, to to protect himself from predators, he cleans himself to not leave, blood um, on his fur, etc. So when I saw this with the dog on with so many different things, the question the question I asked myself was, we human beings, are we animals or not? Yes, I mean we are. Even when we see that the dog, in, you know, even we see a dog doing something cute because it's similar to human beings. Oh, how is this so cute? It's like us. No, we're animals too. So if a dog has an ancestral memory, I mean, we have one too, don't we? Absolutely. Often, as time goes by, we don't realize, we live on a very on a conceptual frequency, but we do react. The way we perceive things is strongly influenced by our familial story. Many studies have shown that there are certain fears and traumas that are handed down from generation to generation. So there is a part of ourselves, you know, that a part of ourselves that we use to interact with the world that comes from our genetics. So even modern science and also Tibetan Buddhist philosophy, they say that it's this genetic filter is not like that and it has to be like that, but it gives a probability. It's not determining. So we have all of this baggage, and this is one of our filters. Someone would say, "Oh, well, we can't do anything about that." Yes and no. The 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 filter that we have in this life is what it is. But in modern terms, we talk about epigenetics. We've seen scientifically that experiences and behaviors transform, they shape our DNA. We transform genetically depending on the life we lead. So even if it started like this, it can shape it. The second filter in Buddhism, it's called Lenkye Gyunten. These are spontaneous characteristics, traits. In other words, these are the predispositions that we have. And in the Buddhist view, when we die, one is reborn, and what continues from one life to another is the very subtle mind. So the conceptual part doesn't continue, the emotional part doesn't either. So what continues are mostly these predispositions, like we could say our deep habits. Uh, an example, for example, let's think of someone who has spent his life lying. When he is reborn, is has a predisposition to lie. Instead, someone who spends his life meditating, in his future life, he will have this habit, have this predisposition of meditating. Then we have this third so-called filter called, so we have Jangtu Gyunten, all the traits that come through the information that we receive through our lives. So from birth, the education that we've received, the stories that they've told us as children, everything we've seen, and all the information that we received. Up to what we read this morning or what we're listening to now, each piece of information that we receive has shaped this world view that we have. It's part of our interpretation of the world that we have. Culture, for example, has a strong impact on this filter. The fourth filter are all the experiences that we've had up till now, our lived experiences since birth to today. There are things that we understand. There are things that we understand because things that were explained to us, and other experiences, things that we understand because we've had our own experience, and that has a lot of power. And the last filter is our own body, the present state of our body. Just to give you an example, if the hormones are upside down, our world perception is going to change, isn't it? I mean, for women, but also for men. Usually, when I make, when I make this example, I give this example, it's usually the women who say yes, but the men, maybe they don't realize the men have their hormonal cycle too. I mean, there's certain men I can even recognize their hormonal cycle. They, oh, okay, he's having his period. Let's wait. So I'm convinced that if the hormonal cycle, if of course, we'd be more aware of it if there were a more physical manifestation of it. But the point is, when something happens, when something changes in our body, our experience of our experience of the world changes. or a little bit of fever, or a little bit of indigestion, or even when we see something simple, like if we see colors, for example, look at this. If I asked you, what color is this? What's your answer? It's red. Do we all agree? And and if I say, well, why is it red? Where would we look for the answer? It's red because someone wanted to make it red. They dyed it red. I don't know, but it's red. But is that an objective reality or a subjective reality? I mean, our spontaneous way of answering would say objective, right? Okay. Do I interpret this as red or is this red? No, this is red. Yes and no. Because if I put this color here, what color is that? It's green. Are they very different? They're different, aren't they? But for a dog, they're not. A dog sees red and green like like two shades of gray. Are they are those two shades of gray or is it red and green? But why is it red? It's because the light touches this object, it reflects onto us with a certain frequency that our sense power of human sight perceives as red. So it's not objectively red. It depends also on how we perceive it. It depends on our sense power, the senses that we have, and we live reality through our senses. And the crazy thing about how we live is that what we see, we think that that's reality, and we're not aware in our daily life that in reality we're just experiencing everything through our senses, and there is no objective reality. So if our senses changes, our perception of reality changes, doesn't it? Okay? So the sixth filter that we could add is our environment, the context in which we find ourselves to the people around us, our environment. This also influences our perception of reality. Now, of all these filters that we have, the most powerful is our own mind. The body is fundamental, but our emotional state, our mental state, it doesn't have it doesn't have a big influence. No, it determines how we live everything. And our mind is the most powerful tool that we have, both for happiness and for suffering. What, what do we need to suffer? Just think about something. Have you ever realized that at a certain moment you're relaxed, happy, and then a thought comes, and then the malaise starts, anxiety starts. But what happened? Hey, I remembered what happened to me. I remembered that I thought that maybe this is gonna happen. And just ask, it's enough to ask ourselves, because suffering is of two types. There's physical suffering and there's mental suffering. The one we're talking about, like about the object that makes us experience this. So the physical suffering comes from direct contact with our physical senses. So if we hear sound that's too loud or cold, or if we're hot or we're burned, this is a physical suffering. Instead, mental suffering, fear, anxiety, just any kind of inner malaise, remember that suffering, there's all the feelings that we have that we want to end as soon as possible, and that we don't want them to come back, and instead happiness, or all the feelings that we have that we want to not finish, and then when they do finish, we want them to come back as soon as possible. And in our life, do we have more mental or more physical suffering? More mental suffering. Do we agree? So Rinpoche, a master of Lama Ganchen, would say, I heard once on a recording, I heard him say, and he was very, very direct, So Rinpoche. He said, suffering is of two types. There's physical and mental. Poor people suffer mostly from physical suffering, and the rich ones suffer from mental sufferings, but at the end of the day, they suffer the same. But getting back to us, I mean, we live in a rich reality. We have been, and we've been able in many ways to avoid physical suffering. If it's too hot, we have systems to cool down the environment. I mean, we never go hungry. There's always a way to find food. When we have pain, we do something immediately to eliminate this pain. So we found many tools to avoid physical pain. I mean, more or less. I mean, it's not that we have such a healthy environment, but in our immediate reality, we have valid tools. But does this mean that we don't suffer and we're really happy? We have a lot of mental suffering. So what happens is mental suffering has an enormous strength, or let's say the mind has an enormous power to make us happy or to make us suffer. And but there's good news here, something wonderful, that if there's something that depends on us, something that we can influence, it's our own mind. This reminds me of the ancient Greeks, the Stoics, where there was this Stoic view, where they said that that phenomenon, the world was divided into two types. The things are of two types: what depends on us and what does not depend on us. What depends on us? Our thoughts, our emotions, our choices, and our morality, our behavior, our conduct. What does not depend on us, they would say, our body, the situations around us, what other people do, etc. And they would say that suffering comes from wanting to have control, over what doesn't depend on us. So thinking that, and so we think that we want to have control over this world that we do not control. So instead, if I understand that the way I live reality, that every experience that I have is strongly, more than strongly, it's determined by the way I live it. By my objective is not to create a perfect world, but it's to find the way to live any situation harmoniously. This is that second path. In other words, the objective is to be well, in harmony, at peace with oneself and with others, independently of where I am, with whom I am, and in what situation I find myself with. Someone might say, well, that's a utopia. And thinking that you can be happy by changing the world around you, that seems more of a utopia. But it's important. The utopias are important because they make us walk. If we didn't believe in a materialistic utopia, would we do something to get more? No. So this utopia gives us this strength to walk on the path. But the key here today is understanding that it's not enough to change the world around us. I mean, because I mean, most of us, materially speaking, we have more than enough, much more than we need. But anyway, we see that there's something lacking. So it becomes fundamental to put energy into that missing part. And here, there's another point too, which is ask oneself, what do I need? According to um, in the Buddhist studies, they talk about the four types of necessities that are connected to the four types of generosities. We have material necessities, and someone who has material needs, someone needs material help, because if someone is hungry, it's useless to talk to him about meditation. He needs to eat. So, and then the second need, these are emotional needs. We need love, affection. Then there's also the need, the necessity of security, to not live in fear. And then there's a spiritual need that we have. Let's start with the first two and give an example. What happens when... No, let's look at it differently. Let's think of most of us, okay, think for yourself and those around you. Are your material needs covered? Yes, yes. We agree, right? Let's imagine every need like a kind of container. And when that need is covered, the container is full. It doesn't matter how much more I give. It's not important. It's useless because it's full. But if you overflow one container, the other containers are not being filled. So so our material needs are full, and if we get sick, the container empties again. But as long as our body has what it needs, that container is full. That second container is our emotional needs, and for most people, the container is not full. Have you ever tried to fill that second container by filling the first? This is a classic in between in a couple. Maybe one keeps giving material to one, and the other one says, "No, but you don't give me enough." But here I am. I'm dedicating my life to you. I'm giving you gifts. No, but I'm giving you. I need affection. Oh, I'm giving you affection by giving you gifts. No, but no matter how much I'm giving you, no matter what I'm giving you, beautiful, lovely gifts. But if that second container is empty or not full, that first one is not going to fill it up. So when we talk about generosity, the one who gives, before giving, he needs to ask himself, what do you need? Because if you need emotional support, I need to give you love and affection, and not material things, because you don't need material things, because it won't matter how much I give you materially, you won't be satisfied, because what you need is something else. You know, it, there could be a time where it seems like it's working, because when you give something more, then there's some kind of pleasure, but that doesn't hold up. So we have material needs, and then we have emotional needs, also for ourselves, giving love and affection to ourselves, our ability to know how to listen to ourselves, to love ourselves, to listen to our own fears. our own sadness, to know how to hold, how to be kind to ourselves and not to go against ourselves or block ourselves, give ourselves a direction. And then we have this need that has to do with security. This, the need of security for me is not about creating a perfect reality, but it's instead where we we we're able to rely on the resources that we have. We can't protect, we can't create we can't create a world where everything will always be perfect, but we can cultivate our own resources so that we're able to face any situation in this immediate moment. The other day, for example, I discovered that I'm allergic to a kind of insect. It's this long story short, I ended up with an anaphylactic shock. And so now, um, I keep medicine with me. I keep medicine with me because I can rely on something that can help me. So I know that I always have this with me if I need it. Similarly, this security we find by relying our own ability to face situations. Like when someone comes to me, as it's happened many times, who has a diagnosis of a bad sickness. When someone has the diagnosis, or it seems that you might have this, but we need to look into this and it's not sure. It's useless to tell the person, oh, nothing's gonna, don't worry, nothing's gonna happen. I don't know if it's ever happened to you. You've been afraid that something could happen, and I mean that possibility is there. So it's useless to say, "Oh, nothing's going to happen." But what I found useful in situations like that is to say to oneself, regardless of what happens, I have the means, I have the tools to face it. No matter what happens, I have the resources to face it. And when we trust our resources, that gives us some that gives us a security to be in the world. The last need is a spiritual need. It's the need to give meaning to life, to live life, to live life going beyond surviving, and that life becomes a means and not an end in and of itself. But to be able to give meaning to life and to live life as a means, to be able to do that, first we need to have our material, emotional, and our needs of security. They need to be covered. What happens for most of us is that we live in a reality where our material needs are covered, but often we try to cover the others with that first one. We try to fill up the lacks, these voids in ourselves by using other external tools, and the emotional needs and 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 the need for like inner security and spiritual needs, they cannot be satisfied by external tools. They can help, but it's not enough. It's an in it's a process that happens inside. I don't know if it's ever happened to you or to someone close to you. What happens when someone has a deep sense of abandonment, great abandonment issues, and that void inside that says that no one loves them and that he can't trust anyone. Maybe there was some kind of trauma that had been created from childhood. I'm not a psychologist, but I mean, there are cases like that. It doesn't matter how many people around that person love that person, how much love they give that person, that wound is still there for that person. And then what happens after a while is, given that that feeling is still there, and what we said before, no, that that we judge what we're feeling inside by looking outside. So there we look for the guilty one. It's like that joke of the finger that I've told a couple times. I when when I was like 5 or 6 years old, I used to tell this joke. I remember like during the parties with the family, with the adults, I'd go around telling this story. Wherever I touch myself, it hurts. My head, I touch my head, it hurts. I touch my shoulder, it hurts. I touch my tummy, it hurts. I touch my nose, it hurts. I touch my knee, it hurts. And I would go on and on and on and on. And the answer was, what sickness do I have? And the answer is, I, uh, I, my finger hurts. I have a sickness of my finger. So if I have a problem with my finger, you know, if I have a problem with my finger, everywhere I touch myself, it will hurt. If I touch my shoulder, it hurts, but not because my shoulder hurts, but because my finger hurts. So if I have a void inside, a feeling of abandonment, no matter where I go, I'm going to feel abandoned. And here there's something more that we can add. I think it's called, there's a name that I gave it, and I think it's the wrong name. I, I called it selective cognition. And I thought it was the right term, but it wasn't. But what I mean by that is that we try, by looking at the world around us, we look for a storyline. We want that storyline to be consistent with what we feel inside. And we're not able to see and to perceive something if it doesn't have a corresponding part inside. Or, like, we're not able to see something if we don't have that concept for it. It can seem strange, but I can give you 1,000 different examples, but when we learn something, when we have that concept inside, then we start seeing that thing. And according to our inner feelings, we try to create these storylines that are consistent with what we feel. So if I feel abandoned, I will actually try to subconsciously create situations that would uphold that feeling I have of abandonment. I've seen people like run away and then come back and say, "Well, you left me, but we were together." What do you mean? You know, we were together. You stood up. You opened the door. You said, "I'm going." I said, "Don't go," and you left. How did I leave you? How did I abandon you? So what happens is we have this constant attitude of creating situations in to subconsciously to create this consistency inside. Is this clear? And we see once again the power of our mind, the importance of having a balanced mind, satisfied, joyous, peaceful. A great master, I think he was the 12th, 13th century in Tibet. It was Geshe Chekawa. He was one of the most important to talk about the transformation of the mind. He said in a text, he said, the mind is full of defects, but it has a great quality. What you teach it, it will follow. Our mind, like everything else, has a fundamental trait, which is one of the basis of meditation, almost maybe of even of physics too. I don't understand much of physics, but I think in physics there's something similar. This principle that says wherever there is interaction, inevitably there's change. If I interact with you, naturally you're interacting with me, and wherever there's interaction, there's change. Is that clear? Wherever there's interaction, there's change. So if I interact with an image, that image it influences me. If I interact with a sound, it it changes me. It constantly changes me. Every interaction I have brings change, and we have an enormous ability to adapt ourselves. The more often we do something, the easier it becomes, for good or for bad, for better or worse. I mean, we are made up of habits. As Shantideva said in the text of Bodhisattva Charvatara, he said, "There's nothing that is not easy once we're used to it." We are made up of habits. So, what can we interact with? We can interact mostly. What are the doors of interaction that we have? Our senses. We can interact with physical objects, with smells, with sounds, with our taste buds and our touch, or the sixth sense, which is also the sense of our mind. With the mind, we interact. What are the objects that we interact with our mind? Concepts, mental images, the memories of the past, projections of the future, the judgment of the present moment. These are the objects with which we interact with the sense of our mind. So among all of the objects with which we interact, is it objects that we see, touch, smell, taste, etc., or mental images? It's mental images, objects of the mind. What does that mean, though? That every thought brings change. Every emotion, every thought gradually transforms us, shapes us. Instead, what we see, we're able to control a little bit. We can even close our eyes and say, "I don't want to see this anymore." But what's the level of control that we have with the sense of our mind? I don't know. Each one needs to answer, but normally our thoughts, our emotions, those go together. In the Buddhist view, there's not much difference between thoughts and emotions. I mean, they're different aspects of the same. What happens in our mind, emotions or concepts, feelings, I mean, do we live it as something that depends on us or as a reaction to the world around us? Normally, it's a reaction to what happens around us. And then that's an enormous problem then, because we're not in control of the most powerful tool that we have for our own happiness or our own suffering. I don't know if that's clear. Because we have a marvelous tool, incredibly powerful, our own mind for being happy and for suffering. But we don't have control over it. And just to say that we're not in control of it, listen to this sound.
Riusciamo a sentirlo, no?
Are you able to hear that sound? Now I'm going to play it again and try to listen to the sound and not think of anything else.
Facile, difficile.
Easy, hard?
La mente va in giro.
Does the mind go round and round?
Cos'altro in mezzo.
Does something else come into your mind?
Entra il pensiero di dire, ma sto
May,
sentendo solo quello o ci sono altri pensieri?
maybe even just the thought of, oh, am I listening just to that sound or are there other thoughts? Even
Questo mi fa ricordare una
this
storia
reminds me of
raccontata
a
da un maestro
story
induista su una
told by
buddista,
a Hindu master about a
raccontando come questo
Buddhist
maestro
master.
che una volta una
No,
praticante fu da un maestro importante
So once a practitioner went to an important
e
master
chiese a lui, io
and
voglio
asked
ottenere
him, I want to
l'illuminazione,
reach enlightenment, I
voglio
want
svilupparmi
to
spiritualmente,
develop myself
eccetera.
spiritually,
Cosa
etc.
devo fare?
What do I need to do?
Questo maestro
And
però
this
dopo aver
master,
camminato per
after having like walked
montagne,
for
ha detto guarda,
months across the Himalayas, and he said, it's very simple.
basta non pensare
Just
alla scimmia verde.
don't think about the green monkey.
Facile,
He said,
non devo
easy.
pensare alla scimmia verde.
Okay, I
Non
should
è che
not
di solito sto pensando alla
think
scimmia verde,
about the
no?
green monkey. Oh, I'm not normally thinking about a green monkey, so
Non
that'll be
pensi alla scimmia
easy. He
verde.
said, don't think about the green
Cosa
monkey.
veniva in mente?
And so now what comes to your mind?
La
The
scimmia
green
verde.
monkey.
Questo qua per anni
So for
cercando di non
years,
pensare alla scimmia
this
verde.
this practitioner is trying not to think about the green
In
monkey.
altre parole,
In other
che cosa vuol
words,
dire?
what does this all mean? It means having control
Avere la
over
capacità di dire
one's
stai
mind,
lì e
have
ci rimane,
the ability to say, mind,
no?
stay there, and the mind stays
Direzionare
there.
la
Our
scimmia
ability
da
to
una all'altra.
direct ourselves from one thing to another
Senza
without
partire dal presupposto di dover raggiungere grandi
without having to,
stazioni spirituali,
without the pressure of having to reach great states, but just
saper direzionare i nostri
know
pensieri,
how to direct
avere un
our
minimo di
thoughts,
stabilità
have the
emozionale,
minimum
riuscire a
amount of
concentrarci,
emotional stability,
riuscire a concentrarci bene,
the
è un
ability to
dono enorme che
to
abbiamo,
concentrate well. This is an enormous gift that we can give ourselves
perché
because
la nostra mente purtroppo è
our
molto attiva,
mind is unfortunately very active,
non nel buon senso,
not in a good way.
perché molto spesso
Very
quando noi cerchiamo di
often,
star
when we
fermi,
try to stay quiet, the mind is there turning.
basta
Do.
vedere.
Just
Abbiamo
see.
chiesto
Just,
prima, abbiamo
I
parlato
asked
di
you
mente fisica,
before. I mean, do we
abbiamo
have more
parlato di
physical or mental
visualizzazione,
suffering? And you all said that we have more mental
sofferenza
suffering.
mentale.
Okay, so
La
mental
nostra sofferenza
suffering.
mentale
This
è
mental
legata al
suffering that we
presente
have.
ed è
What are the
sofferenza mentale.
objects of
Dividiamo
mental
tutto in
suffering?
presente e passato e
Let's
futuro.
divide them
La
into
cosa è più frequente.
present or past and future.
Non so,
What's more
quanto spesso
prevalent? I
soffrite
mean,
per il presente?
how often are you suffering for the
Dividiamo i
present
due tipi di
moment?
sofferenza.
Let's talk about the three
Il riscoprire il
types
passato,
of suffering.
il soffrire il presente e il
Re-suffering the
trascinare il
past,
futuro.
re-suffering the past, suffering the
E allora
present,
cosa
or
possiamo fare?
pre-suffering for the
O
future.
risoffrendo o pre-soffrendo.
Mostly we're re-suffering or
E qua
pre-suffering.
si vede
And you
il potere
see
della
the
nostra mente.
power of our mind and
Fare esercizi anche con noi
just
stessi.
playing games with ourselves.
La buona
The
notizia è che
good
con poco
news
si
is
può fare
that
tanto.
with very little you can do a lot.
La realtà
Reality
è che
is that
con poco,
with just a
il
little
semplice
bit,
fatto di
just
cominciare ad
simply
abituare noi stessi
starting
a
to
stare
just
con
getting used
meno
to
oggetti di percezione,
being with
il
fewer objects of
cambiamento
perception
più fermo, la
helps the
calma
mind
già aiuta tantissimo.
calm down a little bit, and that helps a lot.
Ok? Come abbiamo detto
As
prima,
we
la
said
nostra mente è
before,
fatta di
our mind is made up
abitudini.
of habits.
E la propria parola
And the
meditazione
word
in realtà è
meditation,
una
in
traduzione
reality,
del
it's a
tibetano, se non vado
translation
errato.
of Tibetan, I think, is a wrong
Per le
translation. Well,
traduzioni.
obviously, I'm always there with the problems of
Perché
translation.
se io vi
Because if
dicessi
I said to you,
medita
meditate
nell'amore,
on love,
qual è, che cosa vi
what,
passa in mente
what,
sul
what,
concetto di
what does
meditare
that mean
nell'amore?
to you? Meditate on love.
Riflettere sul significato
Reflect
dell'amore, o no?
about the meaning of love,
Io
right?
dico medita
If
su
I
questo
say
e qual è il
meditate
primo
on
concetto della
this, I mean, what
nostra mente?
idea
Che cosa
comes to you
passa?
in our language?
Devo riflettere su
I
questo,
should
o no?
reflect on this, right?
In tibetano
In
la parola che
Tibetan,
viene
instead,
molto utilizzata
the
è
word
gom.
used is gom.
Gom,
Gom,
letteralmente, il suo
literally,
significato
its
è
meaning is
abituare,
to
familiarizzare.
familiarize.
Ok? Quindi vuol dire
It means to get used to familiar.
con l'amore.
If I say familiarize yourself with
Cosa vuol
love,
dire?
what does that mean?
Devi
It
generare
means you need to
amore
generate
per
love
familiarizzarti
and
nell'agire con amore. È
get
totalmente
used
diverso
to
da quello che è il suo
acting
significato
lovingly or
profondo.
acting with love. It's totally
La
different
parola
from
meditare
the
in
meaning of
tibetano
meditate on love. So
vuol
gom in
dire avere,
Tibetan means
abituarsi,
to
familiarizzare.
familiarize, to get used
Questo
to.
che cos'è?
So what
Che la
does it
nostra
mean?
mente
The
in ogni
concept
momento
is
si
that
sta
our
abituando,
mind is
familiarizzando con qualcosa.
constantly in every moment familiarizing itself with something in every moment.
La differenza che
The
c'è è
difference
abituarmi con
is
qualcosa in un
I'm
modo consapevole o in un modo
we-
inconsapevole.
the difference is whether I'm doing it with
Per
awareness
esempio,
or
vado
without.
a
For
toccare un
example,
singolo punto,
now I'm going to touch
però quando
um,
si comincia a
a weak
meditare,
point. But when we start
innanzitutto in mondi
meditating,
molto
even in
antichi
very
insegno a
ancient
meditare.
texts that
La prima
teach
cosa che
meditation, the
insegna è che se tu
first
vuoi
thing
meditare bene, la
is
prima cosa è
is
che deve toglierti gli
if
oggetti di
you want,
distrazione.
they say, if you want to meditate well, you need to take away your
Perché
objects
dobbiamo
of
creare una nuova
distraction
abitudine nella
because
mente.
we
La
need to
nostra mente
create
oggi
a
è
new habit in our
abituata
mind.
a
Our
vedere un
mind
oggetto di
today
percezione o a
is
saltare da un oggetto all'altro
is
senza
our mind
fermarsi.
used to having one
Ora
object of
siamo abituati.
perception or just jumping from one
Quando siamo
object
piccoli,
to another? Even
in che contesto siamo cresciuti? Non
since
si fa una cosa, si fa
children,
solo
you
quella.
know, what
O
context
mentre si
were
sta
we
facendo una cosa,
raised
si fa
in where
un'altra e si salta da
when
una
we
cosa
we
all'altra
start
cosa.
doing something and we're doing only that thing, or while we're doing something and then we
Poi
jump to
quando
something else, or we're
invece
doing
in
things
questo
simultaneously? And
modo
unfortunately, this has gotten
abituarsi,
so much worse in
quando
today's
io prendo
era.
un telefono in
If I
mano
take a telephone in my hand, for
entro in una
example,
di queste cose
and I
strane,
get into one of
sia
these
Instagram piuttosto che
strange
Facebook,
things like Instagram or whatever it is,
faccio lo sport
and I
nazionale
do this national
con un dito,
sport of my finger, of scrolling,
di stare lì in concentrazione
just I here I
unidimensionale,
am in a single pointed
un
meditation
assorbimento
where
meditativo,
there's
no? Perché non c'è
a
più la
mental
concentrazione,
absorption.
si nota
There's
quell'esatto
nothing
invernito
other than
dove
this
uno non sta
um,
vedendo nulla
silly state
perché
of
se
mind
dopo
where one
un'ora
doesn't see
di questi
something else.
momenti
Because
davanti
if
io ti
one
chiedo
after
che cosa hai visto,
after 1 hour I say,
non è che c'è così
what did
tanta
you see?
chiarezza,
There's not that much
non è che ho
clarity. It's
approfondito
not that one
sull'argomento,
has
c'è un
deepened
livello di
one
banalizzare
subject
l'informazione pazzesco perché
or
passi
deepened in a
dall'albero
subject
vulcanico del
or nothing.
Capetigno a non so che cosa.
Because one passes from information on the war to videos on cats and dogs.
L'illusione che sullo
So
stesso piano
one puts
il
on the
fatto che non sia
same
morto, la guerra che c'è, il pericolo dell'esplosione
the same
nucleare
level,
americana con
the
questo
risk of
fatto
no
che la
nuclear
probabilità sia stessa uguale.
explosion, the child who died,
In
the
realtà a che cosa
dog
stiamo
that was
abituando la nostra
saved.
mente?
But what we're
Avere uno stimolo dopo
instead
l'altro.
we're just getting our
E molto
mind
sono
used
senza
to having
mindfulness.
one
Cosa
stimulus
succede
after
quando c'è
another.
un stimolo
And so
sensoriale?
what happens when
Una
we
cosa
have something a
fisicamente.
novelty? What happens physically when there's
C'è
something
una
new?
carica di
There's
dopamina.
a charge of dopamine.
La dopamina è
And
un
dopamine
ormone
is this
della
hormone
ricompensas
of 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 fullness,
piacere.
and it's pleasurable.
Crea
It
dipendenza.
creates a chemical um,
Quindi se io sono abituato a
dependence.
avere
So if
uno
I'm
stimolo dopo
used to having
dell'altro,
one
più
stimulus after
familiarizziamo la
another,
nostra
and we
mente,
familiarize our mind
quando
to
devo
do
tenere la
this,
mente dentro
when
questa
I need
schema,
to tell my mind to
ho
stay
fatica, è
still, it's
enorme,
incredibly
perché siamo
difficult
abituati
because
al contrario.
we're used to doing the opposite.
Perciò uno degli aspetti di
So
meditare è
one
familiarizzare la
aspect
mente.
of
La domanda è
meditating
però
is
che
familiarizing the
cosa
mind.
voglio
So the question
familiarizzare
is,
la mia mente?
what is it that I want to familiarize my mind with?
E uno dei primi passi
And
per
one of the
familiarizzare
first
la mente
steps
a
is
starne zitta.
familiarizing the mind to stay still.
Qualcuno dice è
And
difficile, è
someone
perfettamente d'accordo.
might say that's difficult, and I
Perché è
totally
difficile
agree.
tenere la mente
Why
ferma?
is it hard to keep the mind
Perché
still?
non è abituato.
Because it's not used to
Siamo
it. We're
abituati a passare
used to spending,
costantemente da un
or
oggetto
we're used to going from one object, jumping from one object to another constantly.
Questo ci porta anche a un altro
This
aspetto.
takes us to another aspect as well.
Nella nostra mente
in our in our mind, we have different levels of of understanding where there's there's a conceptual part where we give names to things. This is this, that is that. There's a part where the inner reaction, there's an inner reaction that's generated, a fear, attraction, aversion, the emotions, these memories that are connected, etc. So, what happens when we see someone, we see something, we see an image, we hear something? There's a conceptual part that says this is this or that is that, but then there's an inner reaction that wakes up an emotion, an attraction, an aversion, a sadness, a fear. It touches something inside. So what happens though is our emotional time is our take they're longer than our conceptual ones. If I go from an image of war and nuclear explosion and then an image of a dog with a little hat or something else, everything I see touches an emotional part of me, but we don't have the time to allow ourselves to feel and digest what is happening an on a on an emotional level. So the emotion of one just overwhelms the other. A very simple example, I don't know if it's ever happened to you, to bring home the tensions from the office. Maybe at work, one has an emotional tension. There's some kind of conflict, some dissatisfactions, anxiety, some kind of feeling. And then one takes it home and projects that feeling on to the people at home or vice versa. This reminds me of a friend in Brazil. At a certain point, he said that that something that helped him, he had a lot of conflict at home, and and he realized though that it was the conflict at work, and then he'd go home and he would fight with everyone. So what he would do is that he would go home and he would try to meditate in car, and he refused to go home until he was able to to digest and let go of everything negative that had happened in the office. And the family knew that. Sometimes he would spend 3 hours in his car before walking in the door. So our emotions need time to settle, to also be lived, to elaborate themselves. And in the lives that we lead, often we don't give ourselves that time. We jump from one object to another constantly. So at the beginning, a side effect when someone begins to meditate is that one when one stays still, what was pushed down comes out. It's not always pleasurable, but it's wonderful because what happens that emotional part that was pushed down for too long, it's like a kind of energy in physics, for example. What's one of the laws of thermodynamics? I mean, the energy is not created, but it is transferred. So what happens if I have tension somewhere inside that was created, and I don't, and it just stays there, and sooner or later it's going to end up in some other part of our body. It's going to end up in transform into sickness. So when we start to meditate and we close, we make our minds still, and these other aspects come out, let them come out, because it's a way to elaborate that which was completely blocked. So, so meditation is not the spa of your mind to feel pleasure. I mean, often it's not pleasurable, can be tiresome, but it's a little bit like going to the gym. It's not I mean, it's not always pleasurable. I don't know. I imagine going to a gym, doing all those. I don't like doing exercise at all. So, I mean, there are those who really like going to the gym. Maybe for those, there are some that some find it pleasurable. But if you're, for example, if you run a marathon, is that physically pleasurable? Um, I mean, there must be a part that's pleasurable, otherwise you wouldn't do it, but it's a hard work. So our objective of meditating is not about feeling inner pleasure. Otherwise, there are the relaxation techniques, but meditation instead has as an objective to familiarize our mind with our qualities, that familiarize gradually, so induce oneself into virtuous states so that we can we so that we can so that we can familiarize ourselves with those states. So virtuous is that which is when it is present, it brings a state of stability, happiness, satisfaction, and helps us avoid suffering. Instead, if it's something that is negative, if we interact with something that is negative, that increases suffering. So when we use the term virtuous, it means that which, when we interact with that thing, it diminishes suffering and increases happiness, mostly on mid and long term. Something that brings well-being in a short term, but suffering mid and long term is not something virtuous, it's negative. Something that is difficult in a short term but brings benefits mid and long term is virtuous. So we give more value to mid and long term results. Now, to meditate, and then we'll look at the meditation techniques, etc., etc. But before getting into all that, I mean, meditate, it's easy in the sense that it's simple. You don't need years of training. It's not complicated. In itself is simple, but as we said at the beginning today, that force that pushes us to do something is wanting that. I mean, so if I don't want to meditate, I will not meditate ever. So why should we meditate? First of all, because the most powerful tool that I have is my mind, and I need to have the reins in my own hands. I need to be able to direct my mind where I want, because I understand that my body is not just a result of what I live, but that I experience everything through the filter of self. I want to clean this filter, otherwise I will keep seeing the world as being dirty. And the key, first of all, is having control over ourselves, being able to direct ourselves one way or another. And this is fundamental, absolutely fundamental. Just look, let's imagine that in our life there are 3 points that are balanced. Just imagine there are 3 points to this balance. On each side, there's the on one side on one side there's the body. So here first we have the environment, the world around us, the situations that we live, everything that we is around us. Then we have our physical state, and we have our body, and in the middle in the middle what's holding it up is our mental state. So if this mental state is healthy and has this flexibility, even if it moves above, it can adapt itself, and so it's able to maintain that balance. This means that even if I have an, a sick body and an unhealthy environment, if my mind is healthy, I'm able to maintain this balance. Instead, if the body is healthy, my environment is healthy, but my mind is unhealthy, that balance is not there. It will be constantly falling. It's like saying about a sick body in a sick environment with a healthy body will still bring balance. It's like it's like it's like living in if someone inner has a healthy mind, a real balance, even in front of difficult situations, like it's an objective. It's a far away object in a utopia. But I've seen people with this state. The first one is Lama Michel Rinpoche, that I was very close to. I saw with my own eyes, difficult situations, and I've always saw him maintain his joy, his calm, his balance, even when his body was sick, even when there were difficulties. And it's not as if he didn't face those problems, but he always kept his balance. This means a healthy mind in a difficult situation, like being in heaven, even if there's a hell. Instead, if your mind is unhealthy, your body is healthy, and the environment is healthy. If your mind is unhealthy, it's like living a hell, even though you are in heaven. I mean, but if we look, I mean, our little world is fine. I mean, we're not missing anything, really. Okay. Now it's more difficult because the cost of living has increased, there's inflation. Okay. But at the end of the day, I mean, we're not in a situation where we really need to worry constantly for our survival. Like we're not look we don't we don't have to worry about dying of hunger or dying of freezing to death. I hope, I mean, I imagine no, but this gives us a fundamental condition to, of having the space so that we can take care of our mind, because when we don't have those basic needs of survival, then it's difficult to have that inner space to take care of one's mind. One needs to take care of one's own just basic survival in that point, in that case. Instead, when one has this balance of the mind, even if after the external even if after those external conditions, those basic conditions are lost, one is able to stay balanced. Just to give you one more example to get to this conclusion, often I've asked people, do you like meditating? People say, oh, I remember once, oh yes, I like meditating. When I meditate in the morning, I'm when I meditate in the morning, I'm just happy all day long. Oh, so you meditate every day? Oh no, I haven't meditated for 3 months. But why? Why? I uh, I found two answers for this. The first answer is when someone is in when one's reality is unbalanced, then that energy goes towards that unbalance. If some if something that's not balanced, I mean that the weight goes towards the unbalance. A doctor once told me that when the body is not in balance, the body is attracted to eating what makes that balance worse. So what he does is the first thing he does is he asks his patients, what do you like to eat more than anything? And if they say watermelon, he says, okay, no more watermelon for you. Because I mean, this happens also, between people. If in a relationship between two people there's balance, and then at a certain point one is not well and reacts with aggression, and that balance is lost, our reaction towards the one who our reaction is what's our reaction? Does it push to rebalance the situation, or do we most often we 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 bring it down, since that balance is lost, we go towards the balance, and then we need to reconstruct everything, which it takes a lot of effort. So it's it's not it's not like I say, oh, you're unbalancing everything. I'm going to try to rebalance. No, I go down. I take us down together. When when a situation is unbalanced, the energy goes towards that imbalance, and it's not a natural reaction, but the healthiest thing to do would be to push the energy against against that imbalance to rebalance everything. So now, to be able to create balance, we need to put energy, and we don't do it spontaneously because we don't want to meditate. We don't want to meditate. Why? Because we don't really believe in if in Buddhist philosophy says that enthusiastic effort is putting energy into something. This comes from aspiration, from wanting something, and desire comes from faith, from believing in that thing. So, who understood this better than anyone else, or those who work in the marketing and advertising? Because if if I'm a company and I have a product and I want people to buy my product, so when they buy my product, they're putting energy in me, in my product. To buy my product, first they need to want it. So for that person to want my product, the first thing he needs to do it, he needs to know my product and understand the qualities of my product, on how it will change his life, and and allow him to imagine himself with my product. I think it's happened to most of us that we've bought a car. The first time I bought a car, I had a budget, even the second time too.
La prima volta erano i soldini che mi ero messo da
So
parte,
the first time,
quei soldini
there was that money that I had, the specific amount of money. So I looked for cars in that price range.
La seconda volta è stato un
This
regalo.
the second time it was a gift. And they saw my old car. They said,
E voglio che sia una macchina buona, questo è il
I
prezzo.
want, I want, I want to offer you a car within this price range. They saw my old car, but in my um, in my looking for cars, I never imagined a Rolls Royce, a Maserati, an Aston Martin. I never put it into the among the possibilities, because I it wasn't in my price range, these cars. Once I saw an advertisement for the Rolls Royce in Amsterdam. There was an um, enormous billboard. It said Rolls Royce, and the advertisement was, if you ask the price, it's not the right car for you. So what happens if I don't believe that I can have that? Then I don't really even want it. I don't know if that's clear. It's not that it's not a beautiful, powerful, safe car. It's not that it doesn't have good characteristics that I would like to have, but I don't allow myself to dream about having of that car. I don't allow myself to think about it. I don't even want it. Never I would never put money away to buy a Rolls Royce, because I know that I'd never get there. Maybe a Panda. So so I can put money aside to buy a Panda, because I know that I can get there. So a basic principle of desire is believing that we can do it. And here we need a fundamental characteristic, which is allow ourselves to dream. Because when we imagine ourselves and we believe that we can get there, at that point, we will put the energy necessary into it. This this reminds me actually of Nietzsche. Not that I studied Western philosophy, but once I saw a documentary and they were explaining the concepts of Nietzsche, and they were saying that in modern terms, he, from what I understood, what I understood, what he said, I don't know. He, he called he called these people these he talked about the last men, saying that they would be these last men wouldn't even dream of reaching the stars because it's too far, too far, and they don't think they would ever get there. So they prefer to stay within the pleasures that they have. So go, they don't seek out higher objectives, but prefer to stay with a pleasurable survival, a state of pleasurable survival. Um, you know, you know, pizza and Netflix. In the past, they talked about, bread and circus, So one stays with a kind of comfortable survival. Say no, to work so hard to do something that I don't think I could even reach. I mean, why should I bother? So instead, we prefer to stay where we are instead of trying something that takes effort. Um, you know, so we don't allow ourselves even we don't allow ourselves to dream. And we see this even in society and even in politics. Often I hear people say that there's no longer any world, there's no view, there are no ideals. We see this in many aspects of our lives. Or am I wrong? Dreaming is fundamental. When we see this place where we are, full of images, in reality, most of these images, what they're saying to us is believe in a dream. They're telling us to believe in a dream. What is this dream? This dream of being well with yourself and with others, independently of where you are. Because the images here we have Atisha, the 11th century master, Lama Tsongkhapa, the master of the 14th century, Buddha Shakyamuni. We have was Trija Rinpoche, who was the master of Lama Ganchen, etc. Who are these people? These are our witnesses. These are those who followed a path, who reached a state of peace. They're here to say, we did it. There are testimonials. These are the testimonials saying, we did it, you can do it too. These images of Buddhas, these are not gods that we ask something from, but they are there. They're the embodiment. They're the material, the personification, the embodiment of our qualities developed to their maximum potential. For example, looking over there, the green Amoghasiddhi, the green is about getting beyond our fear and our fear and our jealousy, and believing and overcoming our doubts. The yellow, it represents generosity and humility. The blue represents overcoming sadness and instability. It represents our love and stability. And our red for example, represents concentration and satisfaction in opposition to a mind that is constantly distracted. The white represents wisdom, c- um, c- a, a, and it represents wisdom, and it represents a view that is consistent with reality as it is. So, what do these images represent? They represent dreams, a dream that we want to reach. So, just to conclude this morning, let's try to imagine what a Buddhist advertisement would be. I've tried to imagine it a little bit. And one day I'll write it. I'll try to find a way to do it. Let's try to imagine. First of all, observe your own life. Imagine. I'm, I'm just going to cut it short. Otherwise, it's just going to be, it's going to be, let's just go right to the conclusion. Imagine your own life. Observe your own life as if you were an outside a spectator in all of its different shades, your body, your physical state, your appearance, the energy that you have, the strength that you have, your sickness, your level of fatigue, without judging. Just observe your body and observe the relationship that you have with the people around you, your family, your friends, your co-workers. Observe the people who are part of your life with all of their characteristics, the positive ones, negative ones, without judging. Well, we're just observing. Observe our material situation. What do you have? What do you not have? Do you have a lot? Do you have a little? Is it enough? Is it not enough? Your house, your car, your money. Observe your material situation. Observe the the um, your surroundings and the social context in which you live, also the environment. Observe your life with in all the different aspects and just allow yourself to observe it.
Adesso
Now,
lasciatela lì dov'è,
leave it where it
senza cambiare
is
nulla,
without changing anything,
senza cambiare il corpo,
without changing your
il
body, your
materiale,
material situation,
e
etc.
permettendo di
And just
disegnare
allow
e
yourself
immaginare
to
come
dream, to
sarebbe la
imagine
vostra vita,
how your life
con
would
tutte le
be
sue sfumature,
with in all of those
senza più
aspects, without
proiettare un mondo
projecting
idealizzato,
an
senza più
idealized
soffrire per le
world,
cose non sono
without
come vorremmo.
suffering because things aren't the way we think they should
Immaginiamo le
be.
relazioni
Let's
con le
imagine the
persone
relationships
dove
with
noi
people
sappiamo
where
vedere l'altro
we know how to
e non
see
la immagine
others
idealizzata
and
di come
not
noi
the
vorremmo che la persona
idealized
fosse.
image of how we want that
Immaginiamo
person
la
to
vita
be.
nostra con tutte le sue
Imagine
sfumature dove
our
noi sappiamo
life
essere in armonia con
where we
l'impermanenza
know how to be in
e con le
harmony with
novità che ci sono.
impermanence and we see the opportunities every
Immaginare una vita più
change
rapida,
where
una vita più
we
odio.
have no anger, we have no
Immaginiamo la nostra propria vita dove
hatred.
siamo in pace con il
Imagine
nostro
our
passato,
life where we're at peace with
siamo
our
in pace con il
past
nostro
and
futuro,
we're at peace with our
di
future.
conseguenza siamo in pace con il
And
presente.
as a consequence, we're at peace with our
Immaginate
present.
la vostra propria
Imagine
vita
our life
dove
where we have an inner state of peace, of calm, where you have the ability to face the various situations without going into conflict, where one doesn't need to compare himself to see himself. Your life as it is, but lived peacefully, harmoniously. We just allow ourselves for a minute to dream it. The question that comes is, do you want this product? Do we want to reach this? If yes, then this product is made up of 3 parts: view, conduct, and familiarization and meditation. We gradually change our way of perceiving things, this worldview that we have. We adapt it to our daily conduct. Our lifestyle means a lot, and we familiarize ourselves with what is good for us. It's possible. So if I allow myself to dream and believe that it's possible to live harmoniously with myself and others, at this point, then it's then meditating is useful. I mean, because why do I want it? Why do I want to meditate? I want to have control over my mind, to reach a state of peace, of satisfaction. I want to be able to live harmoniously in this world, in the world in which I live. And just add one more thing: when we see the world around us, there are many things that we think are not going well, right? I think what this planet needs most are beings, people who have a higher level of love, stability, wisdom. This is what we need most. We can change all the laws and the political parties. We can do, everything more here and there. But as long as we're taken mostly by our selfishness, by dissatisfaction, etc., then we'll keep coming back to the same things. It's like, people ask me, why is there war? Yeah, the war is happening for the same reason that there are fights in families. Because everyone wants what he thinks is right for his I and my. So one of the best investments that we can make for this world is to develop peace, stability, satisfaction, love, compassion, altruism, wisdom, ourselves. It's what we all need most. When one develops these qualities, then one has a tremendous power to influence and help others. It's easy, let's say, to stay in a situation, stay stagnant where we are and constantly point the finger and complain, the system is broken, and the politicians, etc. What's important? I mean, we can judge. Everyone sees for himself, but at a certain point, we need to look to ourselves, and we need to ask ourselves, what can I do in my life? And I think that what the world needs most, just simplifying too much, I mean, we need people, we need healthy people, mentally healthy, emotionally healthy people. And so taking care of our inner health is a great investment that we make also for the world. And meditation is a tangible um, tool to reach that. So, what I invite you to do, first of all, is to allow yourselves to dream. We need to we need to allow ourselves to dream. What dream about what you want? I mean, this is one of the most important question that we have for ourselves in our lives. What do we want? And the question from the beginning, of course, I want to be happy, but where do I project my happiness? Because as long as I project my happiness and my suffering onto the world surrounding me, I will continue to be the victim and point the finger. I'll continue to suffer. So as Buddha said, Dagni Dagni Dagni, etc. I am my own protector. I am my own enemy. And as Buddha said, I am my own I am my own protector, I am my own enemy, and we take responsibility ourselves. Otherwise, there's the danger, and this is classic. You go to someone who says he's Buddhist and says, what are the causes of suffering? And then one repeats, beautiful. Oh, the causes of suffering are mental defilements and ignorance and desire, unlimited desire, together with the actions that are done with these that generate the karma. And and when they come together and bring their results, and we're the results of the causes and conditions bring us within this karmic cycle. But then 3 minutes go by, something happens, and the person explodes. Karma, mental defilements. No, 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 no. Okay, yes, yes, I know mental defilements, but look at what happened. Sincerely, if it hadn't been, if it weren't for this person, I'd be a Buddha. I mean, I get upset because, look what they do. My nature is perfect, but if look what this person does, that person does, these people make me get angry. This is a huge mistake. At the starting point, we need to stop victimizing ourselves without blaming ourselves either. This is an important key. We don't victimize ourselves, but we don't blame ourselves either. There's no reason to blame anyone. There is no guilty one. It's a complex interdependence of cause and conditions that bring us today to be what we are. What's important is to be kind and to accept this present and direct ourselves to our future. Last thing, and for meditation is important, because in meditation one chooses with awareness what to familiarize one's mind with. At the basis of meditation, first one needs to one chooses one object instead of many. One chooses one object. So instead of keeping the mind jumping from many objects, one chooses on what one wants to familiarize one's mind. And in this, at the beginning, there are two forces that guide us in our life. One is the past, and another one is the future. Very often, we let ourselves be guided by the past. Why do I act like this? Why do I do this? Because this happened. I'm like this because that happened. Very often we act in our present as a consequence of what happened in the past. We allow the present to be a result an absolute result of the past. Another fundamental aspect is that the present is the cause of the future, and in the present moment we have our free will. It's very, very small, but it's there where we can choose whether we want to act in this present moment as a reaction to the past or as a cause of for the future. So I want to live my present to construct a certain kind of future, not reacting to my past. In other words, I'm going to act in a certain way artificially to create a new experience that then gradually becomes spontaneous. Because if I let myself completely natural, I am what I am, then the more I get angry, the more often I will get angry. As we've seen, you know, uh, it just gets worse and worse if you let yourself just get angry when you want to get angry, and it just gets worse as the years go by. Our inner mechanisms get more rigid over the years. So the more I act in a certain way, the more spontaneous that will become for me. So if I sincerely but not spontaneously am able to act in a certain way, then more and more I'll be able to familiarize myself with a virtuous behavior. And in Tibetan we have gom and kom. So gom is to familiarize yourself, and kom, if you hear that difference, is having familiarized. So, and at that point, having familiarized yourself with that, it becomes spontaneous. So that inner state that at the beginning we need to put effort into, we want it to arise spontaneously. That's our objective. This is the objective. So we want to construct a future more than react to our past. And this is where learning how to meditate this is where meditation comes in. I mean, learning how to meditate is like learning how to tame a wild horse. It's not easy at the beginning, but we will have control over it. We will be able to do it, and it's not that painful either. Um, I don't imagine. I don't. I don't see anyone here doing um, a, um, a, an intense meditation retreat, taking away all distractions for 7 years. Also, because doing something like that without being prepared is torture. I mean, everything. There's a time for everything. But here we say, I want to take the reins in my hand. I want to face myself. I want to stop victimizing myself. I want to be my protector and no longer my own enemy. At this point, meditating makes sense. At that point, becomes a real tool. Now it's time for lunch, and then we will start. What I want to do in these days is to give you technical skills. There are different types, and then we can do them together, so everyone can leave with some very practical experiences and these tools. And at the basis, we need to dream it. And like with advertising, you can't see that ad just one time. You need to see that ad again and again, day after day. And if you ask anyone who does marketing, what's the objective of advertising? Is it to sell the product? No. The objective, the declared, is it's about changing our habits, creating needs where we don't have them. to, but let's use this in a positive way. This is why we need to allow ourselves to dream and play back that positive advertisement again and again. I want to be a Buddha. As the sixth Dalai Lama said, who didn't want to follow the monastic life, the sixth Dalai Lama, as a child, he was actually had the burden of following the fifth Dalai Lama, who was one of the most important ever. So he was the most important in all of Tibet, and so they recognized the sixth Dalai Lama. He was just a young boy. He said, living in a monastery, forget it. Being the king of Tibet, no way. So he would run away. He ran away from the Patala. I don't know if it's still like this, but behind the Patala, there are some houses painted yellow, and those were the houses of the girlfriends of the sixth Dalai Lama. And in the end, he just ran away completely, and they had to recognize the seventh Dalai Lama, when the sixth was still alive, because they couldn't be without a king. I mean, this is a political story of Tibet, has nothing to do with now. But the point, he wrote many poems, and in one poem, in two, he wrote the same verse. In one, it was towards a woman, a specific woman, and then the other was to women in general. Saying NgalSo, NgalSo, and he wrote and saying, if I desired enlightenment, this Buddhahood, as much as I desire women, I would already be enlightened. And in the other poem, he said, if I desired enlightenment as much as I desired you, with the name of the woman, I don't remember what it is, I would already be enlightened. And he's right, because when we have passion for something, when we fall in love with something, how often do we think of that thing? How much energy do we put into that thing? The key to begin and to continue is falling in love with inner peace. Have passion for a real inner state of peace that will give us the strength to go on and overcome difficulties. But the first thing we need to do is to allow ourselves to fall in love with inner peace. And meditation is a tool, but it's the inner peace which is our objective. So it's time for lunch, and as tradition wants, we make a brief dedication.
Jetsun lame kotse rapten chin nam karatin le chokchur ge padang losan tempe drume sasum ki drowe munsil takto ne gyur chi kewa kunto yanda lamadang dralme cheki pela long chin sadan lamge yente rapzone dorje change kopa nyur toba sho nimo dele tsendele nime kuyan delek shin ninsen takto delek pe kuncho sumke chingi lob kuncho sumke ngodrubot sol kuncho sumke trashi shon.
Have a good lunch, and see you at 3:30.